The November wind bit through Ivy Blake's thin jacket as she counted the coins in her palm for the fourth time. $18.47. At 23, 6 months pregnant, and sleeping on park benches, this was all she had left in the world. 3 weeks had passed since her father's final words echoed through their house. "If you walk through that door, Ivy, don't you ever think about coming back. You've brought nothing but shame to our family." Her mother had stood silent in the hallway, tears streaming down her face, but saying nothing. The woman who once braided Ivy's hair and sang lullabies had chosen her husband's approval over her daughter's life. The baby kicked softly against her ribs, and Ivy placed a protective hand over her belly. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "Mommy's going to figure this out." But as darkness settled over the empty park, Ivy wasn't sure she believed her own words. Her phone had been disconnected 2 days ago. The homeless shelter was full, and Richard, the man who had promised to love her forever, had vanished the moment she'd whispered the word pregnant. A sudden wave of dizziness washed over her, and Ivy gripped the bench to steady herself. When was the last time she'd eaten? Yesterday morning, maybe. The world tilted slightly, and she closed her eyes, fighting the nausea. "Excuse me, are you all right?" The voice was deep, concerned. Ivy's eyes flew open to find a tall man in an expensive coat standing a few feet away. Even in the dim streetlight, she could see he was handsome, dark hair, kind eyes, probably in his 30s. "I'm fine," Ivy said quickly, struggling to stand. Her legs wobbled, betraying her words. Dr. Miles Rhodes had been walking aimlessly through downtown for over an hour, unable to face his empty penthouse after another 18-hour surgery. 3 years since the accident that took Sarah and their unborn daughter, and he still couldn't sleep without the nightmares. But seeing this young pregnant woman alone on a bench, her hand protectively cradling her belly exactly as Sarah used to do, something inside Miles' chest cracked open. "When did you last eat?" he asked gently, his medical training overriding social pleasantries. Ivy's chin lifted defiantly. "I don't need charity." "I wasn't offering charity. I was offering dinner." Miles kept his voice soft, non-threatening. "There's a diner 2 blocks away. Best coffee in the city." Ivy stared at him, searching his face for judgment, for pity, for the look everyone gave her now. Instead, she found only genuine concern. Her stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and Miles smiled, the first real smile he'd managed in months. "I can't pay," Ivy admitted quietly. "I can." Miles extended his hand. "I'm Miles, Dr. Miles Rhodes." After a long moment, Ivy slowly took his hand. "Ivy Blake." The diner was warm and bright, filled with the comforting sounds of sizzling food and quiet conversation. Miles ordered coffee and pie for himself while Ivy devoured a burger and fries with the desperation of someone who hadn't eaten in days. "So," Miles said carefully, watching her eat, "want to tell me how you ended up on that bench?" Ivy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She studied his face. No judgment, just patience. Something about his calm presence made her want to talk. "My parents are very religious," she began quietly. "They had my whole life mapped out. The right college, the right husband, the right everything. I tried so hard to be perfect for them. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, never a single mistake. What happened? I fell in love, or thought I did." Ivy's voice grew smaller. "Richard was older, successful. He made me feel special when no one else ever had. My parents were always so critical, always finding fault with everything I did. But Richard, he said I was beautiful, that I mattered." Miles felt his chest tighten, recognizing the pain in her voice. "We were together for 4 years, Ivy continued. "He said he loved me, that we'd get married someday. But there was always a reason to wait, his business, his family, something. I didn't realize he was just using me." "And when you got pregnant?" Ivy's laugh was bitter. "He disappeared, blocked my number, moved apartments. When I finally tracked him down, he said it wasn't his problem. That's when I realized I'd been living in a fantasy. He never loved me. I was just convenient. Miles set down his coffee cup, his jaw clenched. And your parents? They said I was a disgrace, that I'd embarrassed them in front of the church. My father gave me one chance to fix this. Ivy made air quotes, her voice breaking, but I couldn't. I won't. This baby is the only thing in my life that's truly mine. The raw honesty in her words hit Miles like a physical blow. He saw himself at her age, desperate for his father's approval, trying to be the perfect son. But unlike Ivy, he'd never had to choose between family and principle. You made the right choice, Miles said firmly. That takes incredible strength. Ivy looked up, tears threatening to spill. It doesn't feel strong. It feels terrifying. Miles leaned forward, his voice gentle but certain. Ivy, listen to me. You're 23 years old, 6 months pregnant with nowhere to go, and you're still fighting for your child. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. For the first time in weeks, Ivy felt something other than despair. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. As they walked slowly back toward the park, Miles found himself reluctant to say goodbye. There was something about Ivy's quiet determination that reminded him of Sarah, but also something uniquely her own, a fierce protectiveness despite her vulnerability. Where will you go tonight? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. There's a 24-hour laundromat down the street. Sometimes they let people wait inside if it's really cold. Miles stopped walking. The thought of this pregnant woman spending another night in a laundromat made his chest ache in a way he hadn't felt since Sarah died. I have a better idea, he said quietly. Ivy tensed. I already told you, I have an empty room in my apartment, Miles interrupted gently. It was supposed to be a nursery, but he paused, swallowing hard. My wife died in a car accident 3 years ago. She was pregnant with our daughter. Ivy's eyes widened, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The room's been empty ever since, Miles continued, his voice steady despite the pain. You could stay there, just until you figure things out. I work long hours, so you'd have privacy. No strings attached, no expectations. Why would you do that for a stranger? Ivy whispered. Miles looked at her, this brave young woman who reminded him that life was still happening outside his cocoon of grief. Because everyone deserves a safe place to bring their child into the world. Ivy stared at him, searching for hidden motives, for the catch that always came with men's kindness. But Miles's gray eyes held only sincerity and a sadness that matched her own. Okay, she whispered, just until I can find something else. Miles smiled, feeling lighter than he had in years. Okay. Miles's penthouse was everything Ivy had expected from a successful doctor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, expensive furniture, and a silence that spoke of loneliness. But what caught her breath was the nursery. The room was perfect, soft yellow walls, a beautiful crib, tiny clothes still hanging in the closet with tags attached. It was a shrine to dreams that would never be fulfilled. I can't stay here, Ivy whispered, backing toward the door. This is your daughter's room. Miles stood in the doorway, his hands clenched at his sides. She's not coming home, Ivy. She never was. Maybe someone should get to use this room for what it was meant for. The pain in his voice was so raw that Ivy felt tears spring to her eyes. Are you sure? I'm sure. Miles managed a small smile. Besides, I think Sarah would have liked you. She had your same stubborn streak. As Ivy settled into the beautiful nursery that night, she found herself whispering a prayer of gratitude to the woman she'd never met, who'd unknowingly given her shelter when she needed it most. 3 weeks later, Ivy woke to the smell of coffee brewing and realized, with a start, that she felt safe. For the first time in months, she'd slept through the night without jerking awake at every sound. The past 3 weeks had developed into an unexpected rhythm. Miles left early for his surgeries and returned late, usually finding Ivy reading in the living room or working on a sketch pad he'd brought her. Their conversations had grown longer, more comfortable, ranging from her dreams of teaching art to his passion for pediatric surgery. But more than that, Ivy had begun to transform the sterile apartment into something warmer. She cooked meals that filled the space with delicious aromas, arranged flowers from the market, and left little touches of life throughout the rooms. Miles, for his part, found himself hurrying home from work for the first time in years. The apartment that had once felt like a museum of his grief now felt like a home. And Ivy, quiet, artistic, fiercely protective of her unborn child, was becoming someone he looked forward to seeing. This morning, however, was different. Miles appeared in the kitchen doorway still in his pajamas, his dark hair mussed from sleep. "You're up early," Ivy said, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Surgery got postponed." Miles accepted the coffee gratefully, noticing how natural this domestic scene felt. Patient wasn't stable enough. Ivy frowned with concern. "A child?" 8-year-old boy. "Heart defect." Miles sat at the kitchen island, watching Ivy move around his kitchen with an ease that made his chest tight. "He'll be fine. Just need to wait another day or two." "You worry about them," Ivy observed, settling across from him with her tea. "All your patience. I can see it in your face when you talk about them." Miles looked up, surprised by her perception. "Sarah used to say the same thing. She said I carried every patient home with me." It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife without the conversation ending in painful silence. Ivy set down her cup, studying his face. "Tell me about her," she said softly, "if you want to." Miles was quiet for so long that Ivy thought she'd overstepped. Then slowly, he began to speak. She was a kindergarten teacher, loved kids more than anything in the world. His voice grew soft with memory. She used to say that every child deserved to feel special, to feel seen. When she got pregnant, she was already planning how she'd make our daughter feel like the most important person in the universe. "She sounds wonderful," Ivy whispered. She was. She would have loved being a mother. Miles looked at Ivy, his gray eyes holding a warmth that made her heart flutter. "She would have loved you too. You have the same fierce protective instinct." Ivy felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm nothing like her. She was a teacher, respected, married to a successful doctor. I'm just..." "Stop." Miles's voice was firm, but gentle. "You're a woman who chose her child over everything else she'd ever known. You're an artist who sees beauty even in the darkest situations. You've turned this place into a home in 3 weeks when I couldn't do it in 3 years. Don't diminish yourself, Ivy." The intensity in his voice made Ivy's breath catch. She searched his face and saw something that made her pulse race, a look that had nothing to do with pity or charity, and everything to do with genuine admiration. "Miles," she whispered, but before she could finish the thought, his phone rang, shattering the moment. As Miles answered the call, Ivy pressed a hand to her racing heart. Whatever was happening between them was becoming something more than gratitude, more than circumstance. And that terrified her almost as much as it thrilled her. That evening, Miles returned home to find soft music playing and the apartment filled with the warm scent of something delicious. Ivy appeared from the kitchen, wearing one of his button-down shirts over her leggings, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. "I hope you don't mind," she said, gesturing to the shirt. "I got sauce on my dress while cooking." Miles swallowed hard. Seeing her in his clothes, moving through his kitchen, preparing dinner, it awakened something in him he'd thought died with Sarah. "What's the occasion?" he asked, his voice slightly rough. Ivy smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "I got some news today. Remember that art gallery I told you about? The one downtown that displays local artists?" Miles nodded, moving closer. "The owner saw some of my sketches when I was sitting outside. She wants to display 3 of my pieces next month." Ivy's eyes shone with excitement. "It's not much, but it's a start. I wanted to celebrate." Without thinking, Miles stepped forward and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed with delight. When he set her down, they were standing close, too close, and the laughter faded as they stared at each other. "I'm proud of you," Miles said softly, his hand still resting on her waist. "You're incredibly talented." Miles, Ivy breathed, her hands flat against his chest. He leaned down, and she rose up on her toes. And for a moment it seemed like the most natural thing in the world. Then the baby kicked sharply, and Ivy gasped, the spell broken. Miles stepped back immediately, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." "No, it wasn't," Ivy said quickly. "It's just, this is complicated." "I know." Miles's voice was rough with emotion. "God, Ivy, I know." They stared at each other across the kitchen, the air thick with unspoken feelings and impossible circumstances. "Dinner smells amazing," Miles said finally. Ivy managed a shaky smile. "I made your favorite, the pasta dish you mentioned liking." As they sat down to eat, both pretended not to notice how their hands brushed when passing dishes, or how their eyes lingered on each other's faces. The apartment felt charged with possibility and the weight of everything they couldn't say. Later, as Ivy cleaned up and Miles watched her move around his kitchen, he realized something that both thrilled and terrified him. He was falling in love with her. Not just because she reminded him of Sarah, not out of gratitude or sympathy, but because of who she was, brave, kind, talented, and stronger than she knew. And judging by the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, she was falling too. 2 months later, the transformation was complete. Miles's sterile penthouse had become a warm, inviting home filled with Ivy's paintings, plants that actually thrived, and the constant scent of something delicious cooking. More importantly, Miles himself had transformed. His colleagues noticed the change immediately. He smiled more, left work at reasonable hours, and had started talking about things other than surgery. Dr. Sarah Chen, his closest friend at the hospital, cornered him one afternoon with a knowing grin. "All right, spill," she demanded. "Who is she?" Miles looked up from his patient files, feigning confusion. "Who is who?" "The woman who's made you human again. Don't deny it, Rhodes. You're practically glowing." Miles couldn't help but smile, thinking of Ivy, now 8 months pregnant and more beautiful than ever. "It's complicated, Sarah. The best relationships usually are." That evening, Miles came home to find Ivy sitting on the couch, holding something small in her hands and crying softly. "Hey," he said, immediately concerned, crossing the room in 3 quick steps. "What's wrong? Is it the baby?" Ivy looked up, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Look what came in the mail today." She held up a small package, and Miles recognized the return address immediately, the toy store he'd visited weeks ago. Inside was the exact doll Ivy had described wanting as a child, a porcelain-faced baby doll with blonde curls and a blue dress. "I know you're an adult now," Miles said softly, settling beside her on the couch. "And maybe it doesn't mean as much anymore. But I thought, maybe your daughter could play with it someday." Ivy's sob was half laugh, half cry. "Miles, this is the most thoughtful thing anyone has ever done for me." She leaned against his shoulder, and Miles wrapped his arms around her, feeling the baby move between them. In that moment, sitting in their warm living room with Ivy in his arms and her unborn child active against his side, Miles felt something he hadn't experienced since before Sarah died. Complete happiness. "I love you," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Ivy went very still in his arms. Then she pulled back to look at him, her brown eyes wide and vulnerable. "You do?" "I do." Miles cupped her face gently. "I love your strength, your talent, the way you see beauty in everything. I love how you've made this place feel like a home. I love watching you talk to your daughter, how protective you are of her. I love you, Ivy Blake, and I know it's complicated and maybe impossible, but I needed you to know." Ivy's tears flowed freely now. "Miles, I love you too. I've been so scared to say it because—" Miles silenced her with a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "We'll figure it out," Miles whispered against her forehead. "Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together." For the first time since she'd been thrown out of her family home, Ivy felt truly safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. cherished, protected, loved for exactly who she was. They spent the evening planning the nursery together, Miles sketching modifications while Ivy painted a small canvas of flowers for the wall. As midnight approached, Miles helped her to bed with the careful tenderness of someone handling something precious. "Sweet dreams," he whispered, kissing her goodnight. "Sweet dreams," she replied, her hand resting on his cheek. Neither of them could have imagined that tomorrow would bring the greatest test their newfound love had ever faced. Ivy was arranging flowers in the kitchen the next afternoon when the doorman called up to announce a visitor. She frowned. Miles wasn't expecting anyone, and she certainly wasn't. "Send them up," she said, assuming it was a package delivery. 5 minutes later, there was a sharp knock at the door. Ivy opened it to find a distinguished older man in an expensive suit, his gray hair perfectly styled and his blue eyes cold as ice. "You must be the gold digger who's been taking advantage of my son's grief," the man said without preamble. Ivy's blood turned cold. Even without an introduction, she knew exactly who this was, Miles' father, Dr. Richard Rhodes Sr. "I'm sorry, who are you?" Ivy managed, though her heart was already racing. "Don't play dumb with me, girl. I know exactly what you are and what you're doing here." Richard pushed past her into the apartment, his calculating gaze taking in the warm decorations, the evidence of a woman's touch everywhere. "Quite the setup you've managed. I'll give you credit for that. I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is my son thinking he's in love with some homeless pregnant girl who saw an easy target." Richard turned to face her, his voice dripping with contempt. "But I know exactly what you are, Ivy Blake. A manipulator who preys on vulnerable men." Ivy's hands instinctively moved to protect her belly. "You don't know anything about me." "Don't I? Let's see. Thrown out by your own family for getting pregnant by some man who wanted nothing to do with you. No education, no prospects, no money. Then suddenly you meet my wealthy son at exactly the right moment, when he's most susceptible to a sob story." Each word hit Ivy like a physical blow because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. "Miles found me because he's a good man who saw someone in trouble," Ivy said, trying to keep her voice steady. Richard laughed coldly. "My son found you because you remind him of his dead wife. You're nothing more than a replacement, a pale imitation of what he lost. And once he realizes that, where do you think that leaves you?" "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Richard stepped closer, his voice dropping to a cruel whisper. "Has he ever told you he loves you for yourself? Or does he always mention Sarah when he talks about your supposed virtues? Face it, girl. You're living in a dead woman's shadow, wearing her husband's clothes, sleeping in the room meant for her child." Ivy's vision blurred with tears, but Richard wasn't finished. "Miles is a brilliant surgeon with a bright future ahead of him. He's destined for great things, chief of surgery, maybe even Surgeon General someday. But not if he's tied down to some charity case with a bastard child. You're holding him back from his potential, and deep down, you know it." "Stop," Ivy whispered, but her voice held no strength. "You want him to be happy, don't you? You want what's best for him." Richard's voice took on a false gentleness. "Then do the right thing. Walk away. Let him find someone worthy of the Rhodes name. Someone who can actually contribute to his success instead of dragging him down." Ivy sank into a chair, her heart breaking as every insecurity she'd ever had came flooding back. The voice in her head that had always told her she wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy of love, rose to a deafening roar. "I've arranged a house for you in Riverside," Richard continued, pulling out an envelope. "It's modest, but clean, and there's enough money to see you through the first year. All I need is for you to disappear from Miles's life. Let him believe you've gone back to your ex, that you've decided to give your child a real family." Ivy stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. Everything Richard said echoed her own deepest fears. Maybe she was holding Miles back. Maybe he did only love her because she reminded him of Sarah. Maybe her baby would be better off without the complication of Miles's family, without the shame of her mother's past. "He's a good man," she said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, he is. And good men deserve better than this." Richard placed the envelope on the coffee table. You have until tonight to decide. But ask yourself this. If you really love him, wouldn't you want him to have the life he deserves? After Richard left, Ivy sat in the empty apartment, staring at the envelope and feeling the baby kick restlessly. Every cruel word echoed in her mind, mixing with her own voice of self-doubt. When Miles came home that evening, excited to show her brochures for cribs he'd been looking at, he found a note on the kitchen counter and an empty apartment. Miles, I've reconciled with Michael, and we've decided to raise our daughter together. Thank you for everything you've done for us, but this is what's best for everyone. Please don't try to find me. Take care of yourself. Ivy. Miles read the note 3 times before it sank in. Then he sank to his knees in his empty kitchen and cried for the second time in his adult life, first when Sarah died, and now when Ivy left. The apartment that had been filled with warmth and life just hours before felt like a tomb once again. 3 days later, Miles was going through the motions of surgery when his phone rang during a break. It was James, the building's doorman. Dr. Rhodes, I hope you don't mind me calling, but I wanted to check on Miss Blake. She seemed so upset when she left the other day. Miles frowned. What do you mean upset? Well, after your father visited her, she was crying something fierce. I felt bad for the poor thing being so pregnant and all. Miles went very still. My father visited her. Oh, yes, sir. Stayed about an hour. She was fine when he arrived, but after he left... James trailed off. I assumed you knew. Miles hung up without another word and immediately called his father, rage building in his chest like a hurricane. What did you do? He demanded when Richard answered. I did what you were too weak to do yourself, Richard replied calmly. I protected our family name. Where is she? Miles's voice was deadly quiet. Somewhere she can't hurt you anymore. Miles, you'll thank me for this someday. Where is she? There was a long pause. Then, reluctantly, Richard gave him an address in Riverside. Miles was in his car before his father finished speaking. The house was small and neat, with a tiny garden and lace curtains in the windows. Miles sat in his car for several minutes, rain pounding on the windshield as he worked up the courage to knock on the door that would either restore his life or destroy it completely. When Ivy opened the door, her face went white with shock. Miles, she whispered. She looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, but she was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. May I come in? He asked quietly. Ivy hesitated, then stepped aside. The living room was sparse but clean, with a few of her paintings on the walls and the doll he'd bought her sitting on a side table. Why did you leave? Miles asked, his voice carefully controlled. I told you in the note. The note was a lie. Miles stepped closer, and Ivy backed away instinctively. What did my father say to you? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. The words exploded out of Miles, 3 days of grief and rage finally breaking free. Damn it, Ivy, it matters to me because I love you. No, you don't, Ivy shouted back, tears flowing freely now. You love her, Sarah. I'm just a substitute, a replacement for what you lost. Is that what he told you? Miles' voice was soft with pain. He told me the truth. Ivy wrapped her arms around herself protectively. That I'm not good enough for you, that I'm holding you back, that you deserve someone better. And you believed him. Miles's voice was flat, disappointed. After everything we've shared, everything we've built together, you believed him over me. Look at me, Miles. Ivy gestured wildly. I'm nobody. I have nothing to offer you but complications and problems. Your father was right. You could have anyone, someone educated, successful, worthy of the Rhodes name. Stop. Miles crossed the room in 2 strides and gripped her shoulders gently. Just stop. Miles, do you want to know the truth about Sarah? Miles asked quietly. The truth I've never told anyone. Ivy nodded, unable to speak. I loved her. I loved her completely, and I always will. But that love lives in my past, Ivy. What I feel for you... Miles cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing away her tears. What I feel for you lives in my present and my future. You're not a replacement for Sarah. You're not a substitute. You're the woman who brought me back to life when I thought I was dead inside. Your father said, My father is a bitter, controlling man who's never been happy a day in his life, Miles said firmly. He destroyed his relationship with me years ago, and he's trying to destroy the best thing that's ever happened to me because he can't stand to see me happy. Ivy searched his face, wanting desperately to believe him. You want to know why I love you? Miles continued, his voice growing stronger. I love you because you're brave enough to sacrifice everything for your child. I love you because you see beauty in broken things and make them whole again. I love you because you made my house a home and my life worth living. I love you because when you smile, really smile, it's like watching the sun come up. Miles, Ivy whispered, her heart breaking and healing simultaneously. I love you because you're not Sarah, Miles said firmly. You're Ivy Blake, the strongest woman I've ever met, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and full of hope. I love you too, Ivy whispered. I was so scared that… Miles silenced her with a kiss, pouring all his love and desperation and relief into the connection between them. When they broke apart, both were crying. Don't ever leave me again, Miles whispered against her forehead. Promise me. I promise, Ivy breathed. I'm so sorry, Miles. I should have trusted you. We both made mistakes, but we're here now and that's what matters. As they held each other in the small living room, the baby kicked strongly, as if celebrating their reunion. They both laughed through their tears. I think she approves, Ivy said, placing Miles's hand on her belly. Smart girl, Miles murmured, just like her mother. But their moment of peace was shattered when Ivy suddenly gasped and doubled over in pain. What is it? Miles asked, immediately shifting into doctor mode. I don't know, Ivy panted. It's like, oh God! A sharp pain tore through her abdomen, and she felt a gush of fluid between her legs. My water just broke, she whispered in shock. But it's too early. I'm only 8 months. It's okay, Miles said, though his heart was racing. The stress of the separation, the emotional upheaval, it could easily have triggered early labor. We're going to get you to the hospital right now. As he helped Ivy to the car, both of them were thinking the same thing. After everything they'd been through, they couldn't lose each other now. The labor was long and difficult. Ivy, exhausted from days of crying and the stress of their separation, struggled with each contraction while Miles held her hand and tried to hide his own fear. Something's wrong, Ivy gasped between contractions. This doesn't feel right. Miles squeezed her hand, his medical training warring with his emotional investment. Dr. Martinez is the best OB in the city. You're in good hands. But when Dr. Martinez appeared with a grim expression, Miles felt his blood turn cold. The baby's heartbeat is dropping, she explained quickly. We need to do an emergency C-section now. Everything after that was a blur of sterile lights and urgent voices. Miles was pushed out of the operating room, left to pace the waiting area like any other expectant father, powerless to help the woman he loved. Sarah's death had been sudden, unexpected. But this, watching Ivy disappear behind those doors, knowing she and their child were in danger, this was a different kind of hell entirely. 2 hours later, Dr. Martinez emerged with a tired but genuine smile. Congratulations, he said. You have a beautiful, healthy daughter. 5 pounds, 2 ounces. Small but mighty, just like her mother. And Ivy, Miles could barely get the words out. She's going to be fine. The surgery went perfectly. She's asking for you. Miles found Ivy pale but radiant in the recovery room, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in pink blankets. When she looked up at him, her smile was brighter than any sunrise. Miles, meet Grace Sarah Blake Rhodes, she said softly. Miles felt his knees nearly buckle. You gave her Sarah's name? She would have been Grace's honorary aunt, Ivy said simply. It felt right. Miles approached the bed carefully, as if afraid this perfect moment might shatter. When Ivy placed the baby in his arms, he was overcome by a love so fierce it took his breath away. Grace opened her eyes, brown like her mother's, and seemed to study his face with serious concentration. She's perfect, Miles whispered, tears streaming down his face. She is, Ivy agreed, watching the man she loved hold her daughter with infinite gentleness. Miles leaned down to kiss her, mindful of the baby between them. I love you, Ivy Blake. I love you too, Miles Rhodes, forever. As they sat together in the quiet hospital room, Miles in the chair beside the bed, Ivy curled against him, baby Grace sleeping peacefully in his arms, they both felt something they'd searched for all their lives. Home. After the successful delivery, as Miles held tiny Grace in the recovery room, Ivy looked at him with exhausted but grateful eyes. Miles, thank you for everything, she said softly, watching him cradle her daughter with infinite tenderness. For being here during the birth, for making sure we were both safe. Of course, Miles replied, unable to take his eyes off the perfect little girl in his arms. She's beautiful, Ivy. Absolutely perfect. Ivy smiled weakly. I have a favor to ask. Could you drive us back to the house in Riverside? I know it's a lot to ask, but… You don't even need to ask, Miles interrupted. I'll take you wherever you need to go. During the quiet drive, with baby Grace sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Ivy finally spoke the words that had been weighing on her heart. Miles, I need some time, she said quietly, not looking at him. What happened with your father? Everything that's been said. I need to figure out who I am when I'm not running from something or depending on someone else's kindness. Miles felt his heart crack, but he kept his voice steady. I understand. I love you, Ivy said, tears threatening to spill. I love you so much it scares me. But I need to be sure that I'm choosing you for the right reasons, not just because you saved me. Take all the time you need, Miles replied, though every word was agony. I'll be here when you're ready. As he helped her into the small house with baby Grace, Miles left his card on the kitchen table. If you need anything, medical care for Grace, groceries, anything at all, please call me. After he left, Ivy sat in the quiet house with her newborn daughter and cried for everything she'd gained and everything she'd lost. 3 months later, Miles was reviewing patient files in his office when his secretary, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on his door. Dr. Rhodes, there's a young woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Miles looked up, distracted. Did she give her name? Before Mrs. Patterson could answer, the door opened wider, and Ivy stepped into view. Miles felt the air leave his lungs. She looked radiant, her hair longer and shinier, her complexion healthy, and a confidence in her posture that he'd never seen before. She was holding a baby carrier, and Miles could see Grace's tiny hand reaching up toward her mother's face. Hello, Miles, Ivy said softly, her voice steady but nervous. Ivy! Miles stood slowly, afraid that moving too quickly might make her disappear. How are you? How's Grace? We're good. Really good. Ivy stepped further into the office, closing the door behind her. She's growing so fast, and she's healthy and happy. Miles moved closer, unable to help himself. Grace had grown significantly in 3 months, her brown eyes bright and alert as she looked around the office with curiosity. She's beautiful, Miles said, his voice rough with emotion. Miles, I came here because I owe you an explanation, Ivy began, her hands trembling slightly. These past 3 months, I've been working on myself. I got into therapy. I started legal proceedings against Richard, the man who manipulated me for years. I won a settlement that means Grace and I are financially secure. Miles listened intently, his heart racing. But more importantly, Ivy continued, meeting his eyes directly, I've learned the difference between being saved and being loved, between gratitude and genuine feeling, between dependence and partnership. She paused, taking a deep breath. I love you, Miles Rhodes. Not because you rescued me, not because I needed you to survive, but because of who you are, because you're kind without being condescending, strong without being controlling, and you saw something worth loving in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Miles felt tears spring to his eyes. Ivy! I'm not the same broken girl you found in the park, she said firmly. I'm a woman who knows her own worth, who can take care of herself and her daughter. And I'm choosing you not because I have to, but because I want to. Miles crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 steps, cupping her face gently in his hands. "I've missed you every single day," he said quietly. "Both of you." "Would you like to come to dinner tonight?" Ivy asked, smiling through her tears. "I'd love for you to really get to know Grace, and I'd love to cook for you again in a kitchen that actually belongs to me." "I would love nothing more," Miles replied, leaning down to kiss her softly. As they broke apart, Grace made a happy gurgling sound, as if she remembered the sound of Miles's voice. "I think she missed you too," Ivy laughed. That evening, in Ivy's modest but warm home, Miles watched as she moved confidently around her kitchen, preparing dinner while Grace played in her high chair. The house was filled with Ivy's artwork, plants thriving in every window, and the comfortable chaos of a life being fully lived. Over dinner, Ivy told him about her art classes, her new friendships with other single mothers, her plans to eventually go back to school. Miles shared stories from the hospital, told her about the changes he'd made in his own life, working fewer hours, reconnecting with old friends, even starting therapy himself. "You seem different too," Ivy observed, studying his face across the candle-lit table. "Better different, I hope," Miles said. "Definitely better. More present. Like you're really living instead of just existing." After Grace had been fed and was napping peacefully in her crib, Miles and Ivy sat on the couch together, the space between them charged with possibility. "So what happens now?" Miles asked softly. "Now we start over," Ivy said, taking his hand. "We build something real together, based on who we are now, not who we were when we were both running from our pain." Miles brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "I can't think of anything I'd rather do." As they talked late into the night, sharing dreams and fears and hopes for their future, both Ivy and Miles felt something they'd been searching for their entire lives. The peace that comes from being truly known and loved for exactly who you are. 6 months later, Miles would propose in the same park where they first met, with Grace clapping her hands in delight from her stroller. And at their wedding the following spring, Ivy would look into his eyes and say, "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Thank you for showing me how to live again," Miles would reply. And as Grace toddled between their feet, scattering flower petals with gleeful abandon, both would know that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the courage to save yourself, and then choosing to share that strength with someone who sees your worth.